Hello, everybody. I'm so pleased to have a chance today to talk to my dear and longtime friend, Peter Lovesey, who has just reminded me that he published a book in the Bertie series. Well, let me dig it out here. Which one is it? Bertie and the Tin Man with the,
Yes, Bertie and the Tin Man.
okay. And
Right, got it.
I actually have both editions here, so I will show.
Oh,
Right.
yes. Yes,
Um,
that's
Peter, tell us a bit about why you published this, because this is a trilogy that people think about Wobble to Death and its sequels. And of course, we're here to talk about Peter Diamond, but I've always loved Bertie.
mm, yes. I have too. I had a lot of fun with him, and it was because I was it was written as if it was an autobiography, and I enjoyed playing around with Bertie's voice, and there was meant to be a lot of reading between the lines. The he fancied himself as an amateur sleuth, and he had all the advantages of being an amateur sleuth because he could tell as the Prince of Wales. I mean, he could tell Scotland Yard to keep away if he wanted them to, and yet if he needed them for some real help, he could call them in at a moment's notice. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with Bertie. He's I don't know why I didn't write more really. I think other things just came along, and then the time seemed to be past. I did that first one, which was in a way it was a follow-on from my early Victorian series. Um, I rather wanted to do one about horse racing, um, and that the Sergeant Cribb series, the first series that I ever did. That was a series of 8 books, mostly about Victorian entertainments. And I thought that it would be an idea at some point to do one on a sort of Dick Francis in Victorian times. And so I did. So I wrote this one about the very famous jockey, Fred Archer, at the time, who was the Prince of Wales. Prince of Wales was interested in horse racing, and Fred Archer actually rode horses for him and was the leading jockey of his time. So it was a wonderful sort of way into to the series with a murder fairly early on, and a funeral, and Bertie attending the funeral, and so we had to sort of get on to why Fred Archer had been killed. Had he committed suicide, or had somebody murdered him? And that was the premise for the series, or for the book rather.
Right. You went on to write Bertie and the Seven Bodies. Now, I see that this one published in 1990, and that was the year of the Christie centenary, was it not?
Yes, that's right. Well done. Well done. You're the only person who's ever spotted that, I think. It
Well,
was
the
meant
reason,
to be. It was
yeah,
meant to be a kind of tribute to Agatha Christie, um, because it was the idea that there was a different body each day of the week, and they were away in a country house, and a lot of the Christie elements were in it. There was even a little rhyme, a sort of that I don't know whether you know of it in America. That one sort of Monday's child is fairer face, Tuesday's child is
right. Full of
Grace, I
grace,
think,
Wednesday's
whatever
China.
it was.
Right.
And you go right through and the character, the people who were murdered were meant to fit those. And rather as Agatha Christie used to work, when she sometimes had a little ongoing rhyme as a theme in her books. So there it was. I was doing all that, trying to write an Agatha Christie type of story in my own way, and none of the reviewers picked it up.
Yeah. Right. So Desborough Hall, it was a classic Christie country house murder. But the reason I remember this is that the first time Peter and I actually met, although I was a fan, all
Oh,
the way from Wobble to Death, was in 1990 in Torquay when the Agatha Christie centenary was celebrated. And that was an amazing occasion, wasn't it, Peter? Do you remember
oh,
the
it was.
train? Do you remember they brought in that little version of the Orient Express with David
Oh,
Suchet and
oh, yes.
Remember that? Joan Hickson playing Miss Marple, and we all went down to the station to see the train come in, and they
Mm.
stepped out. It was wonderful, but I was a brand new bookseller and member of the CWA, and we were fortunate enough to be seated with Peter and Jax
Mm.
Lovesey, with Harry and Sheila
Yes.
King, with Bob Barnard and his wife,
Oh, yes.
and one other, Robert, what was his name? He was the chairman of the PWA, the CWA there. I can't think of his name at the moment. But anyway,
I don't know. It was, but yes, Bob was a great friend too. He was a lovely man and a wonderful
lovely.
conversationalist and a great expert on Agatha Christie. He once gave
Absolutely.
a he once gave a talk completely off the cuff. Didn't have a single note with him about Agatha Christie at one of the crime writers' weekends. And it was astonishing to hear, and witty and wonderful, and he had his own theories about her disappearance, and it was marvelous. And yeah, he was such a loss to us all when he went. Died quite young, Bob
He did
Barnard.
die quite young. Yeah.
Mm.
So I had no idea that I was, well, I had some idea. Let me rephrase that. I had felt extremely fortunate to be seated with basically British crime royalty at the
Ah,
banquet that night. It was. I got to dance with David Suchet, who was about my size.
oh
So
well, now that is
that was
royalty.
great. And then the next day, if you remember, we all went to Greenways, Agatha Christie's home,
Yes.
which was still occupied by her daughter, and the grandson, who's still, I think, in charge of Agatha Christie Limited. Matthew Pritchard came, and he and his wife
Mm.
did kind of a tour. And Catherine Aird, actually, Catherine Aird was the chairman of the CWA. Welcome
Oh yeah.
all to Greenways. And
Of course.
anyway, it was an amazing occasion, and I've been very fortunate to spend time with Peter since. I think I was at your Diamond Dagger Award in London. I know that you took me to
Mm.
my first meeting of the Detection Club, which might
Oh
have
yeah.
been, I think, Peter, it was the year that Ellis Peters won the Diamond Dagger. I was there for that,
Oh yes.
right?
All right.
So we have,
So
we have a long history
we have, and my visits to your bookstore, to where you are now, have always been a great pleasure and a joy. And I have come a few times. I wish I could have come more often, but
well,
I
you did the best you could when your son
yeah.
lived in Denver, I think it was. You had more opportunity to, come to the
Yes.
States. Anyway, back to Bertie. There's one more, Bertie and the Crime of Passion. So I think a trilogy, frankly, Peter, is just about right for Bertie.
Yes, it was.
As a
Yes.
long running character, I think he probably wouldn't have worked out, but
No.
to have the three of them is terrific.
Yes, I
And
took him to Paris for the Bertie and the Crime of Passion, and yes, we had some fun with Sarah Bernhardt. Yeah.
she did. But let's talk for a moment about Sergeant Cribb, because that's really where you started. You said you have a copy there of Wobble to Death, right?
Well, I can show you one. Yes, this is the. Can you see that? I can't
Mhm.
see a picture of myself, but is that
It has
visible?
just
That
a bit of a glare, but you can see Wobble to
oh
Death on
oh
the top. Yep.
yeah, yes,
Anyway,
that
right.
was the first British edition. That one. Mhm.
So it's a wonderful story about how you came to publish it. Wobble to Death has to do with the British. Well, you describe it. And what was it that caught your fancy that made you decide to write Sergeant Cribb?
Well, Wobble to Death it was written in response to a newspaper advert for a first crime novel, and the prize was £1,000. Now, in those days, I was a teacher, and but believe it or not, that was more than my annual salary. So there was a big incentive. But I had already written a book, but it was a book about long distance running, which has always been an interest of mine. I'm not a runner, but I delve into the history of these things, and it was covered about 100 years of running, and that had some success. But I thought I would never write another book. You can't then, having done running as a part of track and field, you can't turn to hammer throwing or discus throwing or something else, thinking you can get a book out of that. So I was just sort of looking at the time. I think it was the Times, and there was this advert, first crime novel competition, £1,000. And it was arranged by Macmillan, who were well-known publishers who were about to start a crime list for the first time, and they wanted to to attract some interest in it. And so I then sort of talked it over with my wife Jax, who has always had a big influence on my writing. And she said, well, why don't you use your running as a background in some way? That will at least be an original type of crime novel. And I, first of all, I dismissed it. And then I thought a little more about it. And I remember that when I was researching the earliest of the athletes that I covered in the Kings of Distance, I'd come across in the old newspapers. I went to the newspaper library, and I came across accounts of a strange 6-day contest, a long, long distance, ultra long distance competition, when they ran for 6 days round and round a small track inside the Royal Agricultural Hall, Islington. And there was betting, and there was doping, and there was all sorts of chicanery went on. So it rather lent itself to the idea of a crime story, particularly as it was limited to 6 days, and you could have a murder early on and perhaps another murder later, and it was just time towards the end, about the 3rd day, for the police to clear up the mystery. And I brought in Sergeant Cribb, a Scotland Yard man, and he did exactly that. And really, Cribb didn't change much over the series of 8 books. He didn't develop much as a personality. He just was a fine working policeman, plainclothes man, very important job at Scotland Yard, because the Criminal Investigation Department had just been formed. And he was my first series character, but it was fortunate because I got a television series out of it later, and that was terrific. I was able to retire and become a full-time writer after that.
I remember them so well. They were extremely well done. But, you were kind of in that tradition here in the States. Ross MacDonald, Lou Archer was one of those characters that didn't have a lot of personality, and he didn't really change, in the course of the series. And I don't think I think there were a lot of Golden Age detectives that, were pretty much always the same person.
Yes, but I was thinking, with Diamond, my present series character, there has been quite a lot of development. He has altered quite a bit from the character who was in the first book in the series, but we can come to that in a moment.
We will, and you've done a lot of things to him that you didn't do to Sergeant Cribb.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Right. So I should say that Peter has had an incredibly distinguished career, thanks in part to Sergeant Cribb and the contest and TV and all the rest, but also to his amazing talent. He is the winner of the CWA, the Crime Writers Association. In America, we have the Mystery Writers Association. In England, they have the Crime Writers Association.
Yeah.
The Diamond Dagger, which is their basically lifetime achievement award. The Gold Dagger, which is their accolade for best crime novel of the year. The Silver Dagger, which I don't think exists anymore, but for a while, was kind of like the runner-up to the
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yep. And then for the first Peter Diamond, he won the Anthony Award, which is a fan-based award from Barcelona, the International Mystery Festival. And he's also a Mystery Writers of America Grandmaster, and I'm probably missing about a dozen awards, but you really have had a remarkable career, Peter.
Well, that's nice. Yes, it's lovely to pick up awards, but yeah, you just really get on with the job and write the books and these things. If you're fortunate and the book, some of the books are popular and liked by the right people, you begin to gather a few awards. Yeah.
Well, longevity helps. I mean,
well, it does. It does. I mean, going a long time. Yes. Working it out. I mean, Wobble to Death was 1970. Now that is quite a long time. That's well over 50 years ago. So it is a long career.
I'm going to read just a little bit about Wobble to Death, which I looked up today. There's
Mhm.
an edition, a 50th anniversary edition, with a foreword by Jeffrey Deaver and an afterword by Peter entitled The Wobble That Never Ended, which is
Ah,
great. Anyway, it was the 50th anniversary. It won the crime novel competition, first crime novel in 1970 that Peter has described, that Macmillan put on, and has remained in print ever since. I'm not sure when this was written, and I think that it still is in print, but to be honest, I didn't check. But nonetheless, to have a book in print for 50 years is almost unheard of in modern
ah,
publishing. John
mhm,
Dixon Carr, that's how long ago this was when he was around, wrote, "Here are true Victorians, not pious frauds of legend.
mm.
Sound investigation by Sergeant Cribb rounds out a first-rate story of sustained thrill." And thriller writer James Crumley, there's a fan, wrote, "Nobody ever invented it once again better than that." I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, but still to have James Crumley be a fan of your
Mhm.
books, shows what a universal appeal somehow or other. Writing, about a Victorian detective a long distance running has attracted just an astonishing and varied group of fans, Peter.
Yes, well, yeah, well, that's lovely. I mean, and I still get wonderful letters about Wobble to Death, and people interested in these old races that went on, I continue my interest in track and field history, and I'm a sort of expert here. The Amateur Athletic Association will contact me if they've got any queries, usually from people doing family history about old athletes. I'm saying my great grandfather was said to have won the 100 yards, in 1886, and I will then tell them whether they're right or not, and perhaps say, well, no, it was 1885.
Oh my God, you're right. You're sort of running a mystery Jeopardy contest of your
Yeah,
very.
yes, exactly.
I love it. So Peter Diamond has had a 22 book run, of which we're going to speak in a moment. But I
Mm.
also want to remind people that Peter has written a lot of independent or standalone mysteries, which are wonderful. I'm very bad on names, but one of my favorite involved a writer's circle. It was, again, a very Agatha Christie kind of a book. In fact, I think it was called The Circle, wasn't it? And you had someone named Hen Mallon or Malene. How did you pronounce her name?
Sorry, I'm not, my hearing isn't that good,
I'm
Barbara.
sorry, I'm referring to The Circle, which was one
Oh,
of,
yeah. Mm.
so you wrote two books about a woman named Hen. Um,
Yes, Hen Malin. Yes, yes,
and
that's right.
I love those. I thought The Circle was a very, as I just said, a very Agatha Christie kind of a story involving a group of writers. So,
Mm.
that whole
Yeah, yeah,
circular structure is so Christie when you take a group of people and start picking.
yeah.
Right,
It's fun, great fun to do, and it's a wonderful structure to
right.
work with. Mm.
We've also written quite a few short stories, and those stories have been collected. I think that Crippen and Landru in the United States, if I remember, put together a
Yes,
collection. Yep.
several volumes. Yeah, yes, yes. They do it very well too.
So Peter, has never lost steam. Well, he's just constantly writing. And I will say, I'll give a plug for my friend Otto Penciller at the Mysterious Bookshop for December. He has brought out one of his profiles, a small kind of biography thing of Peter, and that'll be available. So I love those.
Good.
It's wonderful,
Yes.
Peter, to see all these tributes to you.
Oh, well, that's nice. It's lovely and very very satisfying to me to really and a great privilege to have made my living as a writer for all these years. And
Yeah.
still and to be still doing it. I mean, I've given up writing novels. The latest one is the last one because for health reasons more than anything else. But I'm just still doing short stories and still enjoying it.
I know the inside of your head must be just so busy. I often think about what it would be like. So 22 books. It started with The Last Detective. That's the book that won the Anthony Award. And
Mm,
I love them all, but there are various favorites. And one of my total favorites is Skeleton Hill, which starts out with a Civil War reenactment scene, which of course for
mm.
Americans, really means the North-South um, contest. But in England, the Civil War is an entirely different affair.
Yes, I suppose it is. I'm not too, I'm not too well up on the way you do it, but it's taken quite seriously over here as well. Um, and it just seemed to be a good way into a story, um, which yes, I had a lot of fun with.
I'm sure you
And it
did.
took him out. It took him out of his office and up into the downs or the hills that surround Bath. And Bath is one of those places that have got about 7 hills around it. And on one of the hills, there was this very famous battle during the English Civil War. And that was that was the start of the story. Diamond didn't go back to Civil War times, but he was investigating something connected with it.
Well, that's because you had reenactors. We have the same here
Mm.
with our Civil War, but basically you had, Roundheads and Cavaliers, and they were all in costume, which makes it
Mm.
easier for a killer, if they're wearing a costume to move about
Yes, yes,
undetected.
right, right.
So that's a wonderful story. And you mentioned horse racing was a fascination and one reason you wrote The Tin Man, but one of the Peter Diamonds takes us into horse racing. I'm trying to remember, was it The Finisher?
Oh no, there's so many of them. Really, Barbara, you've
Me
got
too.
me there. I can't. I do faintly remember it, but I'm not. I can't
Well,
bring up the title for you.
I think I should have done my homework better here. I think it was The Finisher, but it also could have been
Mm,
shows. I think it was The Finisher.
it
Anyway,
was
you used
right.
horse racing in Bath, I'll say, as a background. And in fact, most of the time, Peter's books have been set in Bath, and you've woven
Mm.
Bath history. There was a very, very good one about the author of Frankenstein
Oh yes,
in Bath.
yes, that's right.
And
Yes.
you've had, Georgian Bath, and you've had all kinds of wonderful stuff. But in Against the Grain, you have taken Peter out of Bath, and you've basically created an English village murder.
Mm. Yes, I thought that would be a good challenge for him and for me. Uh, and yes, I got him out of his seat in the police office, and he's working on his own, which is a change because he usually has this very good team around him, and he can't rely on their help so much. But he's invited out to the village by an old colleague who years ago resigned because she just couldn't do another day's work with Diamond. He was such a difficult man. He's not a likable character really. He's he's a bit of a bully, and she couldn't stand any more of it, although she'd been very loyal to him. And there are things about him that you can like, and she did like. But Julie left and got a job, and then later had retired, and now she's living in the village in Somerset. And something occurs in the village. I mustn't, this is a spoiler, really. I mustn't give too much away.
Yeah.
But Julie invites Diamond out to stay with his partner Paloma, and they after some prompting from Paloma, he's reluctant to go. He doesn't want to leave the city of Bath at all, really. But he under protest, he turns up with her because it's rather important to make friends, make peace even with Julie again. And she's invited them both, and so he goes. And of course, there's a bit of a mystery that Julie is wanting properly investigated. She can't do it herself, but she thinks that it might be a challenge for Diamond, and it truly is.
Very well. The village is called Baskerville, which I think is a wonderful name, sort of evoking Sherlock Holmes, the whole bit.
Yes.
And yes, Julie had an agenda that she was pursuing when she invited Diamond to the village. And
Mm.
you know more about farming, at least as related in this book, than I realized. It hasn't figured into your other books. Where did you pick up so much knowledge about agricultural England?
Oh, I during the war, this is going back years and years, but during the wartime, we were bombed out. We had one of those flying bombs that Hitler sent over, called the V1 or a doodle bug, and one landed in our garden and knocked the entire house to bits. And happily, I wasn't at home. It was my first day back at school. My mother was shopping, but my two brothers were in the house, and they survived because they took shelter under what was called a Morrison shelter, which was actually an iron table, a really, sturdy table, with a sort of wire grill that you could put around the bottom of it, and they got inside there. John was then he was some years older than Andrew. Andrew was about 3, and John was about 11 or 12, and he had the good sense when the warning sign came to take his brother inside there, and the whole house collapsed on them, and they were dug out, and they were dug out alive. By then, my mother had come back from the shopping and was, of course, presumed that they'd both been killed. So it was a miracle that we were all right. My father was away in the army, but then we had to live elsewhere, and we ended up on a farm in the country, actually in Cornwall rather than in Somerset. But that did give me a bit of a taste of what it was like to live in the country, and I think that sort of went deep, and I kept up an interest since. And I did live in a village in Wiltshire later on in my life, and that was quite close to Bath, and I used to go into Bath and do my research. But basically, I was in a small village called Westwood.
Aha. Well, there's a mystery that came out here, I think it was last year, had to do with a silo, but I wonder how many of us, as we're driving through rural areas and see grain silos, recognize their potential for harm. Sometimes the grain explodes due to one thing or another, but also it's an entirely treacherous thing for anybody venturing inside a silo. So this happens right at the beginning. So this is not a spoiler, but this is how the murder that Julie has called Diamond in to investigate, is that somebody has basically suffocated Silo. And so why was he there? What possible reason did he have for going inside the silo? And eventually the grain it's not a solid surface. And eventually he sinks into the grain and it covers him up and he dies. Have you ever, I'm assuming you're too smart to have ever gone inside a silo, but nonetheless.
I did most of that from researching on the internet. I mean, it was once I got the idea of a body being found in the silo, then that's when my crime writer's mind got working. Well, what are the circumstances in which somebody might actually go into one of these things and think that the surface it can get quite crusty on top, and you can be tempted to think, well, it's safe. And I had to think of a situation in which somebody would be persuaded or of his own will go up there and then find that the crust gives way and he's sinking and there's nothing he can do about it. And as you say, the book begins with that situation, with the man getting inside and then sinking down and down. And that's the sort of the start of what I hope is an interesting mystery.
So when you conceived this book, what came first? Did you want to write a book set in a rural village on a farm, and then you tried to decide what was it there that would be lethal to somebody? Or did you have the idea of somebody dying in a silo, and that led you then to pick the village and all the rest of it?
No, it started with the idea of getting Diamond out of town and into the village, and then I thought about farms and silos, and that was how that one worked.
Right. So there's the crime writer's mind, you see. I mean, you have to, you figure out the setting and then you think,
Mm.
what could be lethal? I mean, there are a lot of things that can kill people on farms, as we
Oh,
have.
yes, yes, of course.
Yeah, they're
Is that-
really dangerous places, and pigs are one of the most efficient body disposal machines ever invented.
Mm. Mm.
More than one mystery, has involved, a farm with a significant pig population, and sometimes you can't retrieve any of the body if you've.
No,
Right.
you've read too many of these things, or else you have a criminal mind, Barbara.
Well, both. Definitely both, right. So the other thing, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this without spoiling, but in a general sense, we just had, Peter, an example here in Arizona of a small town in a poor county down towards the southern border of Arizona, and an official there had embezzled, it turns out now, $38 million. And this person was leading a lifestyle that was not commensurate with the community or the economics of that area, or in fact, this person's salary. And so the question is, how did nobody notice for so long that, there was this,
Mm.
um, and that's often the case, that people
Yeah.
are able to somehow or other find an income stream that lets them live in a manner that is quite affluent, and yet nobody seems to think anything of it. Um,
No. Well,
it
that's a perfect cue for a crime story, isn't it?
really is. Yeah. And I mean, I often wonder, and especially in a small community, why somebody like that isn't more visible.
Mm.
I mean, you can sort of understand it if you were, in Manhattan and somebody, was living
Yes.
an extremely affluent lifestyle, you wouldn't question it a lot. You might not be very
No.
suspicious.
Mm.
Although some of the biggest frauds we've ever had have taken places in places like that, like Bernie Madoff. But in a small community, if somebody is living larger than you would expect, I'm often surprised that, people don't question it earlier than
No.
they do.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Mm.
Right. So anyway, keep that in mind as you're reading through
Yeah.
which is a great title, I might add. So another question going on in Diamonds, aside from the fact that he doesn't actually want to go on a weekend, but Paloma
Yes.
points to him that, friendship and other things occasionally demand that you do that, is whether he's going to retire. And that's been kind of an issue in several of the last books, because Diamond and Georgina, his superior at the
Yes.
office, so to speak, there's been a fair amount of tension about whether Diamond was ever going to officially.
Well, yes, yes. Funnily enough, Barbara, in the very first book, which was written 33 years ago, The Last Detective, I was foolish enough to give him an age, and I made him 48. No, yes, 48, 48. And, if you sort of added 33 to that, because mostly I move him on from year to year, he'd be a very old man by now, and he should have retired long ago. Um, but you have to. It's one of those sort of situations where you have to ask your writer, your reader, to suspend disbelief, and they mostly do, and nobody complains about it. I think in the second book I had him a year younger. I wasn't too careful about. He was, instead of being 48, he was 47, um, and he had a cat quite early on called Raffles. Or rather, his wife Stephanie did, and Raffles started as a kitten, but one thing an author does learn is that you can never kill a cat. You can kill off people quite easily, and your reading public will let you get away with it. But a cat, you don't. You don't kill a cat. So Raffles is still going, and he would be very, very old in cat years, I think.
He's a senior cat, no question.
Yeah, very senior. Yeah.
So in the course of the books, you mentioned that Peter's wife was called Stephanie, and in
Hmm.
one of the really more heartrending episodes in the Peter Diamond series. Stephanie herself is murdered, and Peter
Yeah.
then really shouldn't be investigating the case, but being,
Mm,
he can't stay away from the general investigation. And
mm,
so that throws his whole life out of sync. And you've now mentioned Paloma. He's had a partner called Paloma, who's quite an independent person,
mm.
for several books. So as you say, he's changed a lot over the course, and his
Yeah.
circumstances have changed. Even if Raffles is still with us, other people
Mm.
are not.
Yes, that's right. And he changes. And I was thinking the other day about a long series. Um, the author should not get bored with a character or feel that the character is becoming too cozy or too predictable. And well, after I'd written 6 books in the series, I was beginning to feel that with Diamond, that I don't really know whether I want to go on with this anymore. Perhaps I should move on and find another character. Um, and so I put it aside, and I wrote another book, a one-off book, as it turned out, called The Reaper,
Mhm.
and that was a break from Diamond. But by the time I got back to it, I thought he needs some really tremendous, life-altering thing to happen to him, and that was the murder of his own wife, Steph, as you mentioned. Um, and it that gave boy, I get a lot of blame for that. Every time I give a talk anywhere, somebody is sure to stand up and say, "How could you do that?" I loved her. She was such a likable character and so important to him, and they were a lovely couple together and all those things. But I have to say that to them that creatively it was important for me, for Diamond to have this tremendous challenge. Um, and it took several books for him to come to terms with the loss of his wife.
Mhm.
So that, you know, gave me the impetus to carry on. And I would never have written 22 books in the series if something like that had not happened. And that's the only answer I can give. It's not a very satisfactory one, funnily enough, for most of the people who really like Steph. But and sometimes they ask, "How's your wife, Jack?" And I have to say, "Well, she's doing fine."
Well, that's true. She's still alive, so nobody can say
Yes,
you
that's
took
right.
murdering stuff from real life. Well, there've been other people. We've already talked about Julie, who was in the series and then gave up.
Mhm.
Diamond has had other colleagues and friends come and go. You've also the reorganization of British policing from time to time.
Yeah.
Even the more comfortable headquarters or station that he worked out of in Bath has been modernized and moved and so forth. So that was another
Mm.
adjustment for him.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I mean, the backstory with Diamond was that he started with Scotland Yard in London, and at a time when the police were really rough and ready, and he was involved in a case where he beat somebody up, and they they wanted to get rid of him, and his only option was to move out to the country to this rather genteel place of Bath, and he came there, and even in the first book, The Last Detective, it was meant to be a one-off. It wasn't meant to carry on and become a series. And towards the end of the book, he is dismissed from the Bath police for knocking a child against a wall and giving the child concussion. Well, the background to that was that his mother, the boy's mother, was an important witness, and she was in the house, and Diamond wanted to get in quickly and interview her before she ran out through the back door. He pushes the boy aside, and with fatal consequences for his career. So we end The Last Detective with Diamond becoming a Santa Claus in the local store at Christmas time, and that was it. I thought it was the end of the series, but it had a big success, that particular book. As you mentioned, it won the Anthony Award, and it had some very good reviews, and there was a lot of pressure for me to give him, give him another book. But I thought, what am I going to do? I can't go on writing a series of books with the character who keeps sort of falling over bodies and isn't a complete sort of amateur. I want to get him back in the police, and so I wrote one book in which he investigates a murder almost by accident as a civilian, and then for the third book, called The Summons, he is needed by the police back in the job to cover a case which he investigated once before, and they need him more than he needs them, and he's able to go back on his own terms, and is a policeman again. And then I was into this series of books, which has lasted a long time.
Well, that's true. So we have The Last Detective, Diamond Solitaire, and then The Summons. And then from then, as you say, he's a member of the constabulary. Now, Bath is a major character in these books, if not in this last one. And there's so much history in Bath, so many centuries, so many different cultures, and tourists. So you've taken advantage, I think, of so much that, I've been to Bath several times and I always thoroughly enjoyed it. It seems to me to be a very rich ground, for you to have been plumbing all this time.
Oh, it is wonderful, wonderful. Wonderful history, and so much in it that I could mine and use. And sometimes a little nugget of information can become quite important in the writing. I found out that Jane Austen's aunt lived in Bath and was a shoplifter, and was arrested for stealing some, I think, a bolt of linen, and she sort of walked out and got out of the shop, and then was arrested later and spent quite a long time on remand, waiting for her case to come up. And poor Jane and had to visit her and try and sort of speak nicely to her and cheer her up, and that provided a fairly important element of one of the books in that series. And then, as you mentioned, there was the Frankenstein thing. That too, I learned. Much of Frankenstein was written in a room over a shop where Mary Shelley was living, just very, very close to the Abbey. And I found out where it was. It had been knocked down, but I found out the position of it and mentioned that in the book. And nobody seemed to know about it. And then there were several phone calls to me to say, how did you find out about this? And now there's actually a Mary Shelley experience going on in Bath, a walking tour, and yes, and purely as a result of this book. That's many years ago.
Well, you also dove back into the Georgian area with Beau Nash. And so that book, which Beau Death, because the pump room was thought to have, or probably did have, for that point of view, very, if not healing, at least comforting properties, because A, it was hot water at a time when that wasn't always available, and B, the water could actually work to some degree as a laxative. And for people whose diet was often very stodgy, that was a helpful thing for digestion. The Romans actually took advantage. I think they developed Bath as a spa. Anyway, and so the pump room became a very fashionable for a long time in Georgian society. People go drink the waters sit in the bath,
That's right.
the
There
whole
was a
bit.
season they'd come out of London and come down to Bath to spend what they call the season there. And yeah, it was a big social thing,
It
and
was.
Beau Nash was at the heart of it, and was the sort of organised the balls and the dances, and was a very well known figure there.
He was indeed. I mean, he's one of those sort of self-created entrepreneur, but he had a
Mm,
fertile background for all of that. The Prince Regent, and during the Regency, his idea of a more fashionable spa was to go to Brighton, where he built the pavilion. So that,
yes.
to some degree, fell out of style. Although Jane Austen certainly had to live there and populated a couple of her books there, the whole bit. And the Regency mystery, as far as I can tell, will never die. It kind of
Mm,
comes and goes, but it's a fascinating period of English
it
history.
is.
Yep.
Yes.
But I really love Beau Death because I thought you took such great advantage there. One of my favorites, and I'm trying to remember if it's called The Tooth, I'm terrible with titles. The Tooth Tattoo. Was that the one about the Japanese musician they came to visit?
Yes, that's the musical one.
Right.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And about a string quartet, basically. And that was prompted by an article I read in the Guardian, one of our newspapers, um, by a member of an excellent string quartet who said, I forget the headline that he had, but basically he was saying, um, how can you spend all this time with these three other people without wanting to murder one of them? And I thought, well, hey ho, that's a good idea. And so so I brought that to Bath and wrote yes, and had a lot of praise for it. I'm not a musician. I knew very little about music, but it's something that I very much enjoyed researching, and I had some very good feedback from musicians, including the quartet that this chap wrote about in the Guardian, and they invited me to go along and hear one of their concerts, which I did in London, and I was taken sort of backstage to meet them all, yes, and I was told that one or two really prominent musicians had either written to the members of the quartet, and I had some nice feedback, nice letters myself, saying that how did I know so much about music, or how true it was, and they couldn't fault anything. So I was amazed. I was amazed. I thought that must be full of errors, really. But you dig away, and research has always been a joy. It's not a thing that is sort of clinical for me. It's a great pleasure, and particularly when you find out little bits of information that you think you can use. You only use, it's like the iceberg thing. You only use about one eighth of it or something.
Yes, but that's one of the real pleasures of reading your books is all these little unexpected bits, whether it's
Mm.
history or, I mean, I thought that the Tooth Tattoo had one of your trickiest plots. So I remember how much I enjoyed watching the story unravel, but the best crime fiction, I always think, not only entertains but informs. And if you have somebody as reliable as Peter, who really does his homework, and you can trust the bits that he puts in are, as far as he can make them, accurate,
Mm.
and you have a chance to really learn some. I mean, I always feel that I have a head full of just, completely, it's a rag bag of knowledge. I mean, completely unrelated
Mm.
stuff all over the place. And that's largely from authors like Peter, who enjoy researching all kinds of different things and then, as needed, put them into their books, or they become the
Yeah.
foundation of the plot or something. So, Peter, I've always, you're a marvelous prose stylist, and a very, very clever and deceptive plotter. But I've also learned over the course of your work many things that would never have come my way. So I'm grateful for that.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
So you're going to maybe continue writing a few short stories, but this is you feel your last full-length novel?
Yes, I was really advised if I wanted to go on, I probably wouldn't finish another novel. I've got a sort of terminal illness now, unfortunately. So that was what I was told, and I thought, well, oh dear, I better finish off the one that I'm doing, which was Against the Grain, and delivered that, and I'm so delighted to have lived long enough to see it published. And happily, I've sort of outlived my sell-by date up to now, and I'm still enjoying writing a few short stories. And there are hopes that I might even have a volume of short stories out next year.
That is such wonderful news. And, I think that one way to keep going in the face of the circumstances that you are meeting is, in fact, to keep busy.
Yeah,
As long as your mind is, agile and enough, and your interest level is high enough, you've got enough energy, in little bursts to do all
yeah.
this. I'm sure that has propelled you, as you say, past your expected termination date. And
Mm.
I will not be surprised if we have a conversation again with a volume of short stories. That would be a delight.
Yeah. Oh, well, that would be good. That would be good. Yes, and you're so right. It does keep me going, and I feel writing a short story. It's a little escape for a while. You concentrate fully on what you're doing for a time, and yeah, and then you're starting to think, well, there must be another one coming along. So you do.
Well, as far as I can tell, you move through life, with inspiration, little plot things coming your way just every
Mm.
day. And a short story, after all, is dependent on a very specific and very tight plot, right? You don't
Yes,
have
yes,
time for a
yes.
lot of character development. So really the short story depends on having a really great idea that you can develop.
Yes, I've said before, I think I say on my website somewhere about short stories that if I could make a living at it, I would be quite happy to do that. But unfortunately, they don't sell as well as novels do, particularly novels written in a series.
Well, I think they're a great gift. So I am delighted to hear that you are working on some.
Mm.
I'm going Against the Grain publishes on December 3rd from Soho Press, which has been Peter's had many, well, several anyway, publishers, but Soho Press has really gone the distance with you. And
Oh, yeah.
it's wonderful that all of the books in this series are still in print. And for 22 books, that's a fairly unusual thing today. So
Mm.
those of you who may never have read Peter Diamond, you can pick up any of the books and read them and enjoy them for the plot and the story, the characters and all. But it's really wonderful, if you haven't read him, to start with The Last Detective and read your way forward, which is what I've been able to do because I've read
Yeah.
them in real time as Peter has published them. But I do recommend that when you can pick up Peter
Mm.
Lovesey book, you will always love it. So happy holidays to you, Peter, and to Jax and to Phil and his family. And thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Really enjoyed this, and thanks for all your kind words.
You're so welcome. It was a great pleasure. Bye.
Bye.